In 1973, Warner Brothers executives gathered to watch Blazing Saddles in silence. When the credits rolled, not one person clapped. The studio chairman pulled Mel Brooks aside and asked if he could reshoot the entire movie with a white actor in the lead. Brooks politely wrote down every demand, nodded, and smiled. As soon as the executive left, he crumpled up the paper and threw it in the trash. What the studio didn't know was that Brooks had final cut. No one could force him to change a thing. That moment became part of a story Hollywood tried to bury. A year earlier, Brooks felt like everything in his career was falling apart. He had already made 2 films, The Producers in 1967 and The 12 Chairs in 1970, and both had flopped financially. The Producers cost nearly $1 million to make but earned less than half that worldwide, even though it won him an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. The 12 Chairs did even worse, and after its failure, no studio wanted to work with him. He was broke, his wife Anne Bancroft was pregnant, and he couldn't afford much beyond the basics. That was when David Begelman stepped in and got him a small writing job at Warner Brothers in 1972. The project was a weird Western script called Tex-Ex. It wasn't meant to be made into a film, but that little job turned into Blazing Saddles. Brooks and Bancroft's relationship had always been grounded in struggle. Back in 1961, when they first started dating, he couldn't even afford dinner at a modest Chinese restaurant, and secretly slipped him a $20 under the table when the bill came, and when Brooks tipped with it to look cool, she slapped him outside and said, "Don't tip with my money." Yet she always believed in him, insisting he'd go places. When he later told her the name Blazing Saddles, she said it didn't make sense. Brooks just replied, "It doesn't have to, it sounds wild and Western." The script was written with the help of Richard Pryor, whose raw, fearless humor shaped its edge. Brooks wanted Pryor to play Sheriff Bart, but the studio refused, saying he was uninsurable because of drug arrests. Pryor later found out he'd been replaced by Cleavon Little and felt betrayed. Some said Brooks made up the insurance excuse to avoid being overshadowed. Still, with 2 flops behind him, Brooks couldn't afford to argue too hard. Warner Brothers gave him a small $2.6 million budget and one last chance. Brooks originally offered the role of the Waco Kid to John Wayne, who loved the script but declined, saying it was too dirty for his image. Then Brooks cast Gig Young, a veteran actor who'd played drunks before. But during his first scene, Young collapsed from alcohol withdrawal and had to be rushed to the hospital. Desperate, Brooks called Gene Wilder, who had already said no once. This time Wilder simply said, "I've been waiting for the call." He flew in and started filming 3 days later, saving the production and becoming part of one of the most iconic comedy duos in history. Wilder and Cleavon Little's chemistry gave the film heart and balance. They weren't just teacher and student but true friends. Filming was chaotic but full of creative energy. Brooks constantly fought the studio over content. Warner Brothers executives hated the racial slurs, the fart scene, and the horse punch. They told him to remove them all. Brooks calmly took notes, smiled, and when the meeting ended, threw the notes away. He had final cut and he wasn't changing anything. When the film was screened for Warner Brothers executives, they hated it. Some suggested releasing it quietly in just 3 cities. Others wanted to bury it completely. One executive, John Calley, urged them to wait and see how regular audiences reacted. Brooks's producer, Michael Hertzberg, arranged a second screening for secretaries, janitors, and mailroom workers instead of executives. From the first scene, they roared with laughter. The reaction was so overwhelming that Warner Brothers couldn't ignore it. They still tried to limit the release, but theaters demanded it. Blazing Saddles opened on February 7, 1974, in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. To everyone's surprise, audiences went wild. Word spread fast and the movie became a runaway hit. It climbed the box office charts for 10 weeks before reaching #1, even against The Exorcist and The Sting. By the end of the year, it had earned $119.6 million in North America, over 4,600% return on its tiny budget. Adjusted for inflation, that's close to $600 million today. Despite that success, Brooks only received $50,000 for writing, directing, and acting. Warner Brothers, meanwhile, made tens of millions. Brooks's creative instincts drove everything. When he needed a singer for the theme song, he asked for someone like Frankie Lane. To his shock, the real Frankie Lane showed up. Brooks didn't tell him it was a comedy. Lane sang with full sincerity, thinking it was for a serious Western. That mix of earnest vocals with absurd visuals became perfect parody. The film broke taboos left and right. The famous campfire scene was the first in American cinema to feature realistic fart sounds. Brooks and his team didn't use real recordings. They made them by hand, rubbing soap and water under their arms to create the noises, adjusting tone and rhythm until they got the perfect comic timing. He tested the number of sounds scientifically, deciding 12 farts got the biggest laughs before humor started to fade. It took 35 camera setups and dozens of takes because the actors couldn't stop laughing. The scene almost got cut by the studio, but Brooks refused. Behind the laughter, the set carried real tension. America in 1974 was still grappling with deep racial divides just 6 years after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Cleveland Little, as a black sheriff in a movie filled with racial slurs, received hate mail and death threats. Many people misunderstood the satire and thought the film condoned racism instead of mocking it. Some of the white actors like Burton Gilliam struggled with saying the lines. Between takes, Gilliam apologized constantly, but Little reassured him. "If I thought you meant it, we'd probably fight. But it's just a movie." He told him to say whatever was needed to make the joke land because he knew the message mattered, showing how stupid racism really was. Brooks's approach to comedy was fearless. He believed that if something was funny, it was worth doing, even if it cost money or offended people. For one short gag, a jazz orchestra playing in the desert, he flew out the entire 17-piece Count Basie band in tuxedos. The scene lasted only 20 seconds, but it was unforgettable. Brooks loved breaking the rules, just like his cinematic heroes Buñuel and Goddard. Near the film's end, the cowboys literally break through a movie screen into a musical set on the Warner Brothers lot, a joke that executives hated but audiences adored. When Blazing Saddles premiered, Warner Brothers barely promoted it, expecting it to fail.